Bethany Winz is studying social justice at Trevecca Nazarene University, where she's learning to love the great city of Nashville. She already loves Jesus, hot tea, good books, and bacon. Bethany processes the world by writing. She blogs about the adventure of growing up and what she's currently learning about justice. Bethany grew up in Orlando, Florida, with her parents and her brother. Bethany, welcome to 100 Huntley Street.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Oh, we're glad to have you. And you're certainly a young woman who's on a mission to change the world with your voice. And you have written a captivating book called One Dress, 1 Year. Now, to begin with, Bethany, please tell us, did you really wear one dress every day for an entire year?
I did. All 366 days, because that year was a leap year.
You had to choose a leap year, didn't you?
Of course.
Of course you did. Now, did it look the same every day, or did you tweak it?
No, it was buttons down the front, and it was really big buttons. And so I would sometimes wear it open. I would wear it with different sweaters. I one time wore it tied up in the front with a pair of shorts. And so I did it different ways on different days.
So how old were you when you did this?
I started when I was 16.
Wow, you were 16 years old. Okay, so why would an American 16-year-old in her right mind wear the same dress every day for a year? What was your purpose? What was your point?
I was doing it as a way to raise money to help end an awareness about human trafficking. That was something that I had become aware of in middle school and then learned more about it as I went into high school. And it was something that I felt like I couldn't know that it existed and not do something about it. And so I had seen a couple of other young women do similar projects, and I thought it looked kind of fun, it looked kind of cool, it would be a good attention grabber. And so I decided to do something too.
And so did the year experiment of wearing the same dress, did it accomplish what you wanted it to do?
It did. It didn't accomplish what I set out to. I set my goal for $100,000 when I started. Not that I tend to be overambitious ever.
Oh,
but,
of course you don't.
So that was the goal that I had set. And another young woman who did a year-long project to raise money for kids in India did a year, and she was able to raise $100,000 in her year. And so I thought, oh, okay, this kind of thing catches on. That's not a big deal. So I set my goal for $100,000, and I wound up raising just over $8,615.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it was less than a tenth of what I had set out to raise, and that was something that I kind of struggled with. I kind of felt like I wasn't doing everything that I was supposed to be doing, and maybe if I just worked a little harder and was a little bit better, I could get my people to pay more attention and I could get more money. But at the same time, I got to watch as people learned about human trafficking, and then as they decided that they couldn't know about it without doing something about it. And because the project stayed fairly small, I knew most of the people who donated. And so I got to kind of hear some of their stories as I watched God move in them to give. And so that was really incredible.
Now, when you do something like this, take a stand against human trafficking, and you did it by wearing a dress for a year just to bring some attention and to raise money. But I would imagine that it did a greater work inside of you. What did God do in you during that year that you wore one dress for 366 days?
Yeah, it was amazing to me, all of the things that I wound up learning about myself and about God through that process, because I set out to change the world for other people. And so I wasn't expecting for it to impact me so deeply. As I wore the dress, I kind of just struggled a lot with perfectionism and pride and guilt and feeling like I wasn't measuring up. I felt like I wasn't as pretty as some of the other young women who had done similar projects, and so maybe that wasn't why I was getting as much attention. And I felt like maybe if I would just work a little harder, or if I would write better blog posts or something like that, people would see it. People would be more inclined to see it, more people would share it, and more people would give. And so I struggled with a lot of that, and just with feeling like, as much as I knew the right answers about grace, feeling like I needed to earn it, and like I needed to work so that God would approve of me, or even just so that other people would be impressed. I learned a lot about how much I like to impress other people as well, which was a project as big as something like wearing a dress for a year. A lot of people know about it, and so I kind of struggled with that as well, and with learning what to do when I want to do something good, but my motives are kind of mixed up.
Wow, Bethany, that's powerful. What you just shared is a powerful lesson that whether you're 20 or my age, we still struggle with some of those same issues in our Christian walk. But in your book, one of the things you talked about is, as a teenager, you were highly impacted by a book called Do Hard Things. Tell me how that book spoke to the deepest parts of you.
Yeah, my best friend and I read that book together, and it really resonated with us because—
And who's it by again?
Alex and Brett Harris.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and they were calling for a revolution, or a teenage rebellion against low expectations, with the belief that teenagers can do more than what most of society expects of them. And that really resonated with us because we kind of wanted to do something. At the same time, for me, that kind of translated into doing something big. And they talk a lot in that book and in their follow-up book, Start Here, that a lot of times doing hard things isn't about doing something big and incredible, but it's about being faithful to the places God has called us. And that's not always glamorous. And so I've kind of struggled with that as well, with my perfectionism and with wanting to do something big and with wanting to do it perfectly, and wanting, you know, doing hard things to an extreme of having to do big things and having to do them 100% right. But it was a really challenging book, and it was a book that got me thinking. It was also a book that continued my education about human trafficking, because they talked about their friend Zach Hunter, who started Loose Change to Loosen Chains. And his work and his books also had a huge impact on me. But yeah, it just made sense to us that we could do more as teenagers than what was expected of us. And so we decided to do some cool stuff.
You did it. You know, I really believe that you can tell a whole lot about a generation, or specifically about a person, by who their role models are, by who their heroes are. And one of your role models is a woman by the name of Christine Caine. And that tells me a whole lot about you, Bethany. Tell me how Christine Caine, who is a female evangelist, speaker, word teacher, tell me how her message has changed your life.
Well, for me, one of the biggest things that changed me about the work that she's doing is when she started the A21 campaign, which stands for Abolition in the 21st Century. And she spoke at the Passion Conference the January that I was in the process of making the dress. And I had set my start date for February 1st. And so I was taking a break from making the dress. I was in a bit of a frustrating place with the buttons and the buttonholes and my sewing machine, and didn't really know if I wanted to follow through with it. And so I took a break to listen to her message from Passion. And she was talking about trafficking, and one of the things she talked about was meeting a young woman in one of their shelters. And she had been telling this young woman about God and about what he had done in her life and about how he had transformed her. And this young woman looked back at her and said, "If what you're telling me about your God is true, why didn't you come sooner?"
Wow.
And it's easy for us to blame things like that, say, why doesn't God do something? And so that was kind of a moment for me to say, okay, why don't I do something? And I was in the middle of getting ready for this thing, but I actually wound up pushing my start date up to January 11th because I got the dress finished, and I was just ready to go. And that line was ringing in my ears, and so I thought if I could do something a little bit sooner, then I would.
So in your book, you used terms that I wasn't familiar with, and one of the terms that you used was a slavery footprint. What is a person's slavery footprint? Because we all have one.
Yeah, the slavery footprint is developed by the company Made in a Free World, and if you go to, I think it's slaveryfootprint.org, they have a survey there, and you go in and you take the quiz and you talk about your eating habits and your purchasing habits and what clothes are hanging in your closet and what makeup is in your cabinets, and all sorts of things like that. And then based on the kind of things that you buy and the amount of things that you have, they'll do a calculation for how many slaves work for you. Because for most of us, we think that this is a problem that exists overseas. And while that's true, it also exists in our cities, But beyond that, the things that exist globally, because we live in such a global economy, my purchasing habits have a direct impact on someone else's life around the world, someone I've never met, someone who's working long hours in a factory in Bangladesh, for instance, making the clothes that I'm wearing. And so all of those things kind of play into it. And so they do this quiz, and they'll tell you how many slaves work for you. And it's a little bit shocking to come face to face with that number, because we don't realize when we walk into a store, like all of the steps that were involved in the supply chain.
And it's slaveryfootprint.org.
I believe so.
Great, great. Okay, so let me ask you one more question. What do you see yourself doing 10 years from now?
I'm not really sure. I'm currently studying social and environmental justice. I want to work with the church to address our consumerism and how it relates to injustice, not just in our purchasing habits, although that's a huge part of it, but also how the way that we consume is harming the planet, and how often that creates injustices around the world as well that we in the West can often buy our way out of, at least for now. And so I want to work with the church on some level. I want to keep writing, but I don't know exactly what that's going to look like.
Well, Bethany, whatever you do, I know you're going to have a great impact for the kingdom of God in your generation, and we're all going to be watching your life with grand anticipation.
Thank you.
And I just want to encourage you, one dress, 1 year, great gift for some of the young women, young people in your life. Great gift for you, to challenge you to do something for the kingdom of God at your moment in history.